From the weird to the wonderful, the UFC has provided us with some of the most incredible and random moments over the years, and just when you think that you've seen about everything, bam, something comes and hits you completely out of left field and makes you reassess your whole life. From strange walkouts to split-second finishes almost out of nowhere, today we are taking a look at some of the most random, head-scratching moments that make the UFC so unpredictable. These moments have left fans and fighters alike asking, what the hell have I just seen? And we're going to relive some of the most random events that have left us talking, from strange pre-fight happenings to wild post-scrap festivities. So buckle up, as here are 10 of the most WTF moments in UFC history to date. And if you enjoyed today's video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It makes a massive difference. We're looking to upload here at least once every week. Number 10. Diego Sanchez, the Crucifix. Fight fans who've been following Diego Sanchez over the years will know all about how weird and wacky the guy can be. He emerged on Series 1 of The Ultimate Fighter back in 2005, being known as the oddball due to his spiritual practices and love of yoga. At one point, I believe he was actually trying to channel energy from a thunderstorm. However, it ultimately didn't stop him from winning the middleweight bracket of the show, dispatching of Kenny Florian in the final to earn his UFC contract. Over the years, Sanchez has obviously been caught up in some peculiar practices, to say the least. I mean, just look at this picture of him hanging upside down while Joshua Fabia works his magic on him. That settled in. However, one of Sanchez's strangest happenings came in the form of his walkout for his UFC on Fuel fight with Jake Ellenberger back in February 2012. Sanchez marched out with a robe on to Harp and Liar's Psalms 150, stern-faced and hooded, as he extended a large wooden crucifix with a grimace upon his face. While it was clearly a nod to his religion, Sanchez kind of caught fight fans worldwide off guard with his prop, and it ultimately didn't do him any favours either, with Ellenberger ultimately winning the fight after 3 hard rounds via unanimous decision. Number 9. Kimo Leopoldo carries the cross. Speaking of crosses, does anyone remember Kimo Leopoldo's antics at UFC 3? We're taking it way back to the dark ages here, but Kimo Leopoldo famously faced Royce Gracie at UFC 3 back in September 1994. Gracie was obviously very well established within the promotion, winning the first and the second event that the UFC ever put on, and he was a massive favourite for taking home the third too. In his first fight of the third event, he faced Taekwondo master Leopoldo, who made waves particularly for his entrance to the Octagon. I'm going to have to look down at my screen to read this verbatim, but one of his cornermen came out with a huge sign that read, "Jesus said if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me," which is obviously a quote from Matthew 16:24, before Leopoldo followed with a huge, massive wooden crucifix on his back. In a touching message, the cross read, "Jesus loves you" on the back, but unfortunately, in similar fashion to Sanchez, Leopoldo also lost his scrap, submitted via armlock just shy of 5 minutes into the bout. Number 8. Aljamain Sterling wins the title via disqualification. Look, there's no dispute that Aljamain Sterling is one of the greatest bantamweights to step foot in the Octagon in terms of modern-day mixed martial arts, lifting the divisional title in March 2021 with a victory over Piotr Jan. However, the manner in which he clinched the title in the first place will leave a stain on his legacy for the years to come. The New York native was 19-3, headed into the full with high-level wins over Corey Sandhagen, Renan Barão and Pedro Munoz, to name a few. And while many people assumed that he would use his superior grappling to get the better of Jan on the canvas, the fight played out in a polar opposite state of affairs. It was quite an even matchup up until the 4th round, when Sterling shot for a laboured takedown and Jan defended it with ease. Sterling was posted at the canvas with one knee down. Jan was then heard talking to his corner before hitting Sterling with a solid right knee to the dome, which sent him obviously spiralling towards the canvas, clutching his face. Referee Mark Smith called time to allow Sterling to recover from the illegal blow before the cage side doctor waved the fight off completely. Sterling looked dejected and disappointed as Dana White wrapped the bantamweight strap round his waist. Fight fans worldwide revolted at the decision and questioned whether a title should be able to change hands via disqualification. I don't know. I'm pretty sure that the microphone also picked up Joe Rogan saying that he detests how the title can change hand in such a fashion as well, but such is life. However, Sterling successfully defended his belt in an instant rematch the following year, erasing any doubt whatsoever with regards to whether he deserved the belt in the first place. Number 7. Michel Pereira's backflip. It was May 2024 at UFC 201 when Michel Pereira took freestyle fighting new extremes with his fight against Iho Potieria. The Brazilian was able to clinch a standing guillotine in the very first round of the fight, which is a rarity in itself. However, it's not the defining factor which lands him on this list. That's because moments earlier, Pereira was almost disqualified. Potieria was on his back on the canvas, Pereira was standing over him, and instead of trying to pass guard in a traditional sense, Pereira decided to turn his back to his opponent and then backflip over his guard. Luckily landed on his chest rather than his head, because as we know, that would have been a strike to a downed opponent, which would have been illegal and a disqualification if he had knocked him out. And while people flocked to social media to say that they were really impressed with Pereira's antics, cage-side commentators were less than impressed. I've got something here which Paul Felder's quoted as saying, which is I still think he's got to learn his lesson from doing backflips and trying to land illegal knees. I mean, look, we've seen some incredibly flashy things over the years. Shara Bullett's recent double back fist knockout, Anthony Pettis' Showtime kick against Benson Henderson, Jorge Masvidal's flying knee with Ben Askren, which knocked him out, starched in 6 seconds flat, I think it was. But want to see more of it. Want to see more. Number 6, Bryce Mitchell, freedom. Arkansas native Bryce Mitchell's had his fair share of WTF moments over the years, from, kind of almost ripping his nutsack off with a drill during some home DIY, to his most recent take on Adolf Hitler, which saw him receive a wealth of criticism, and rightly so. However, a weird instance inside the Octagon is what lands him on this list. It was September 2023, and Mitchell was faced off against Dan Ige on the undercard of Rafael Fiziev versus Mateusz Komrat at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. Everything seemed pretty normal headed into the fight as Joe Martinez made his pre-fight announcements, up until Mitchell whipped the Holy Bible out of nowhere, held it above his head, walking towards Ige, and screamed freedom. As per usual, you could hear a pin drop in the Apex, which made it just that bit more awkward for everyone watching along. However, unlike Sanchez and Leopoldo, who have previously mentioned on this list with their own religious antics, Mitchell won his fight against Ige via unanimous decision. Number 5, Shane Burgos, delayed KO. After going 6-2 with the UFC with wins over Kurt Holliber, Cub Swanson and Makwan Amirkhani, Shane Burgos was pitted off against Edson Barbosa in May 2021. The Hurricane was known for his well-rounded approach to fights, equally as able as finishing the fight on the feet as he was on the mat. However, some people questioned how he would fare against the Brazilian, who had faced a number of high-caliber opponents in his own right. Surprisingly, Burgos held his own for the first 2 rounds before he was caught with a 1-2 a minute into the third, surprisingly tanking the power of Barbosa at first, especially considering he landed directly on his temple. However, about 3 seconds later, Burgos ultimately started tumbling backwards before collapsing at the side of the Octagon. Barbosa obviously showing that killer mentality by springing on him and finishing the job. It was an incredibly weird way for a fight to end, especially given that Burgos wasn't starched straight away by the shot, which many other fighters might have been. And it's not often that the UFC commentary table are left completely speechless, but Joe Rogan and Daniel Cormier didn't have words for what they'd just seen. And neither could Dana White, as the cameras picked him up jumping to his feet with a panicked look on his face as soon as Burgos hit the deck. If you watch the replay, you can literally see White standing there looking absolutely sickened by what he'd just seen with his hands on his hips. Number 4, Igor Severino, bite of the night. Igor Severino looked an incredibly promising prospect when he was signed to the UFC in September 2023, following a second-round finish of Jonata Silva on Dana White's Contender Series. But he only lasted 2 rounds before he was cut by the promotion completely. Why? For biting his opponent. 7-0 at the time, the Brazilian made his debut against Andrea Lima in March 2024, a fellow countryman who was also 6-0 headed into the bout. And while it was a toss-up as to who was going to win, basically given that both men were undefeated and they both had an unbelievable amount of hype headed into it, the fight ended in infamous fashion to say the least. Severino had Lima pinned against the cage looking for a takedown in the second round when he appeared to put his head into his arm and take a bite. Time was called while the replay was reviewed before Chris Tognoni waved off the bout for foul play. And as he was having his hand raised in victory, Lima showed off clear teeth marks on his bicep, proving Tognoni's assumptions as clear. And what makes this even more bizarre is that Dana White actually gave Lima a $50,000 bite of the night bonus, and the Brazilian also got the outline of the bite tattooed on his arm with text on it reading, "I got fucking bit bonus." Incredible. Number 3, Dennis Hallman's unique attire. Dennis Hallman rocked up to his UFC 133 bout with Brian Ebersole in some incredibly unique attire, which has never been seen in the Octagon before or since. With a record of 50-13-2 headed into the bout, Hallman was no joke, but the bright blue Speedos that he chose to wear certainly were. Thankfully, for the eyes of fight fans worldwide, Hallman was TKO'd in the first round by Ebersole, who in turn received a $70,000 thanks for getting those horrifying shots off TV as soon as possible bonus from Dana White. Hallman later told Ariel Helwani that he only wore the shorts because he lost a bet with a teammate and he didn't think that anybody would be cross with him for it. However, White didn't take kindly to the gesture, which he later described as disgusting. Hallman had just one more fight in the UFC in the same year before he was released for missing weight twice in a row. Number 2, Heath Hackney's low blows. So it goes without saying that low blows in today's MMA are a complete no-go, with referees often awarding a 5-minute timeout to allow the striker who's been hit in the groin to recover. However, this hasn't always been the case. Back in the day, the UFC were incredibly lax on the rule set, and it meant that The likes of kicks to downed opponents, 6 to 12 elbows, and strikes to the nether region were all fair game. And Heath Hackney obviously took full advantage of this when he faced Joe Son at UFC 4. After a couple of punches and kicks were exchanged on the feet, Son took Hackney down to the canvas looking for a submission. However, Hackney ultimately found his way back to his feet before hitting Son with a takedown of his own. Son had Hackney in a headlock off his back at the time, and in a bit to break the hold, Hackney basically just started raining down on his opponent's balls. I think he hit him about 6 or 7 times in total before the lock was ultimately released, and Son tapped out of the competition. After all, I mean, anybody who's ever been hitting the balls will know just how horrendous it feels. Number 1, Khabib Nurmagomedov incites a riot. Arguably one of the biggest MMA fights of all time, Conor McGregor versus Khabib Nurmagomedov was always going to have its fireworks. Khabib famously had a scuffle backstage with Artem Lobov in 2018, who was a teammate of McGregor's at the time, which led to McGregor running backstage at the UFC 2023 media event, launching a dolly through a bus window, which Khabib was sat on with other fighters. The two were then announced to be fighting each other at UFC 229, and to simply say that there was trash talk headed into the belt would be the understatement of the century. McGregor was especially ruthless towards Khabib with his trash talk headed into the fight, criticising not only Khabib's fighting style, but also digging out his family and friends. So when the two finally did meet in the Octagon, an all-out war was pretty much expected by fight fans around the world. A wall of security separated both men as Bruce Buffer made his in-cage announcements before the action got underway, with Herb Dean the third man in the cage. Khabib's game plan headed into the fight was simple: maul McGregor with his Dagestani wrestling, while the Irishman was ultimately looking to pick apart his foe on the feet. However, Khabib shocked fight fans worldwide when he actually dropped McGregor in the cage, and then finished the fight in the 4th round with a neck crank, but it wasn't quite done there. Khabib famously stood over McGregor, exchanging some choice words before Herb Dean pulled the two apart. So what happened in the aftermath of the fight that landed on this list? Khabib marched over to Conor McGregor's corner while pulling out his gum shield, throwing it towards Dylan Dennis, I think, in particular, before leaping over the cage, jumping in the crowd to go at it with Dennis, who was obviously McGregor's BJJ coach at the time. Mayhem ensued as law enforcement and UFC personnel tried to get the situation under control. Meanwhile, allegedly one of Khabib's teammates leapt into the cage and had his own go at McGregor. Buffer was left to announce the winner of the fight by himself in the middle of the cage in almost comical fashion as both men were pulled away from the action, and it will certainly go down in the annals of history as one of the most volatile moments that fight fans have ever seen, as many were left completely speechless as to what had just occurred. The record, I mean, would obviously seen little spats here and there after fights, but would never seen something quite at this scale. Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more MMA content. Drop a comment below with your most memorable moment from UFC history, or let us know what you'd like to see featured next. And until next time, keep training, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.